Hi, I'm Todd Jones. I host the podcast Pressbox Access. Check out this clip from my conversation with Charles Pierce. Pierce recalls how Larry Bird was different from all the people who viewed him through the prism of race. You know, you're a Boston guy, the Boston Herald, Boston Globe, grew up in New England. When you think of Boston and basketball, the first name that comes to mind is Bill Russell, obviously. But in your era as a writer, it's Larry Bird. And you wrote one of the great pieces that I remember as a young writer reading, and that's the 92 Esquire piece, The Brother from Another Planet. Where it really was looking at Bird through the prism of race a little differently than everybody else was looking at the thing between Bird and Magic. Tell us about your experiences with Larry Bird and what went into that.
Just as a sidelight on Bill Russell, one of my earliest moments of amazement at a basketball game was my father and I went to see the Celtics play the Lakers in Bill Russell's last year. And this was a time with the Celtics where you could walk up to the ticket window and buy a loge seat for Celtics Lakers and have no problem at all getting in the building because nobody went.
For $4,
not just that, but nobody was there. The Celtics of the Bill Russell era did not draw that well. This was a regular season game, and they won the game because in the last couple of minutes, Bill Russell blocked a Jerry West layup from behind and a Chamberlain dunk. And I mean, it was astonishing to me that he'd been okay for the most of the game. He held Chamberlain fairly well at bay, but just those two plays at that moment I still get chills thinking about it, especially him catching up to West from behind. But anyway, moving on to Larry. Larry Bird is one of the most fascinating human beings I've ever met in either of my particular journalistic enthusiasms. He's just an interesting human being. First of all, and I've said this in a lot of different forums, he grew up in southern Indiana, poor and white. In southern Indiana, which was the birthplace, number one, of the modern Ku Klux Klan, and second of all, was a place so marked by white supremacist violence that civil rights pioneer Jim Farmer wrote in his book that it was worse than Mississippi, that he found it more dangerous than Mississippi. And Larry grew up, by all indications, completely unmarked by that particular odious current of American culture. He doesn't see race. He never did. And he never saw it, as near as I can tell, he never saw it as a teenager. He certainly never saw it as an adult. You talk to Jalen Rose or Reggie Miller about having been coached by him. Jalen Rose says he saved his career. But Larry he didn't see it. He wasn't marked. It didn't bother him. He hated the whole white hope thing because it was so different. It seemed so far out of his ken. It was a dynamic he didn't understand. And
I think that's why, Charlie, your 1992 Esquire piece, The Brother from Another Planet, left a mark on me because it made me see Bird in a different way. It was using the prism of race, but in a way that shone a light on that topic and Bird much differently than everybody else was kind of.
Yeah, I mean, he understood the dynamic of people using him for their own, nefarious psychological purposes. He understood that. He hated it, but he understood it. He had clearly studied it, and thought about it. I mean, he thought about it deeply enough to reject it from the bottom of his soul. But he wasn't going to let it touch him, and it never did. The great thing about the interesting thing about Larry was that there were always myths about him, and outside of what we just talked about, the two presiding myths about Larry Bird were, one, that he's not athletic. And that was based solely on running and jumping, which even track and field doesn't see as the summation of athleticism. And I've said for this to this day that anybody who thinks Larry Bird wasn't athletic never shook hands with him. Because from the elbow to his fingertips, he was one of the greatest athletes I ever saw. The combination of hand-eye coordination and you know and his hands were battered. I mean, he kept breaking his fingers playing softball and stuff. But from the elbow to the fingertips, he was stronger than anybody I ever saw. You can count on on the fingers of one hand the number of times people got a rebound away from him once he latched onto it. And the other thing is, the easiest way to end up with an empty wallet at the end of a long evening is to think Larry Bird is dumb. Larry Bird is a very, very smart man. And I tell people all the time, syntax is not intelligence. Unread does not mean unlettered. I mean, unlettered does not mean unread. This guy is an extraordinarily intelligent person, and somebody who's taken the lessons he's learned through his own life very much to heart, and has evolved as a human being as much as anybody I've ever seen. I am a complete admirer of the person that is Larry Bird. I mean, I think he has built the life he wanted to build in his own way, and he's done it in a way that wasn't destructive to very many people. That wasn't destructive to many people. There was the whole thing about his daughter that he had when he was young that he had not brought into his life, and that's a real brown spot on the apple. But by and large, this is a very highly evolved and very intelligent human being, to say nothing of an otherworldly basketball talent.